So I've recently published this new commentary on Matthew's Gospel. So what is distinctive about it? There are a number of commentaries on Matthew's Gospel available. So what's distinctive about this particular reading or interpretation of Matthew's Gospel? One of the things that I think is very distinctive about it and very important about it is that it focuses throughout on the visions of society, societal practices, societal structures, and societal personnel. Now, this is distinctive because so often interpretations of Matthew's Gospel focus on individual piety or personal piety, which is fine and good. But what I draw attention to in this reading of the Gospel is its engagement with societal visions and practices and structures. It engages with how life is organized, how society is organized, communal interactions, and particularly practices of justice in relation to those structures. Who gets what and how, and who decides? Who gets left out? Who gets marginalized? Who gets excluded? And by reading the Gospel of Matthew through this sort of lens, I'm able to interpret Jesus' teachings and actions and conflicts along these sorts of lines. The reading takes the Gospel's focus on the divine purposes for the world very seriously, purposes that benefit all in society, purposes that are marked by what is life-giving, loving, and liberating. So in order to do that, I pay attention to three big social contexts in the first century world and look at how the gospel interacts with and engages those particular worlds. The first one is the world of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was pervasive in the first century. You got out of bed, you stubbed your toe on the empire. There was no way of escaping it. It's like global capitalism in our own world. It doesn't go away just when you stop using your credit card for half an hour. It's still there. And that's true of the Roman Empire in the first century. The Gospel is written sometime late in the first century, the 80s or the 90s, shortly after Rome had attacked and destroyed Jerusalem and the Jerusalem temple in the year 70. And that event sent a massive shockwave through the Jewish world of the first century. It was a massive assertion of Roman power, a massive assertion of Roman domination, of intolerance for anybody who didn't toe the party line, so to speak. So the gospel engages and negotiates this particular world of Roman hegemony, Roman power. It engages the inequities and the injustices of the Roman world, and it shapes a community of Jesus followers who at times have to accommodate to this world, who have to make their way in it, who have to survive in it, but also who can resist this world and model an alternative way of existence, who can oppose it and challenge it. And of course, they do so in the very difficult position of following one who was crucified by Rome and one who declared that he was going to come back and destroy the Roman Empire. Hardly good marketing tools when you think about it in a context after a massive display of Roman power. So that's one big context that I want to pursue through this reading of the gospel and position a reading in relation to that particular context with its particular social visions and structures and practices. But a second context in which I locate the gospel has to do with the interaction with a synagogue community. I think the Jesus folks are still part of a synagogue community. But post-70, with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the synagogue community is wrestling with the way ahead. There are big questions that have surfaced. How is divine presence to be encountered now and where? How and where is divine atonement to be encountered? How are folks to live in this world of massive Roman power, especially if the events of 70 were understood to be divine punishment? Then how is one to know what the divine wants? And the Jesus folks, arguing in this context, have a one-word answer: Jesus. And the gospel constructs Jesus as a response to these sorts of issues. So from chapter 1, Jesus is the one who is to save his people from their sins. Jesus is identified as Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus is the one who is sanctioned by God to reveal the divine purposes. And so we have big blocks of teaching material scattered through the gospel where Jesus discloses this divine will of a different way of life. And thirdly, in terms of context, I bring into play in this reading of the gospel the setting of it, which most folks think has to do with the city of Antioch in Syria. Um, this was the third largest city in the Roman Empire. It was a big city. It was the capital of the province of Syria. But Antioch, as a typical Roman city, represented all the disparities of the empire. So it was a very comfy place if you were amongst the small percentage of elite folks. But for most folks, non-elite folks, it was a place where survival was a desperate struggle much of the time. It was a place where folks tried to earn a living by manual labor. And you, of course, you're only one accident away from changing the course of your life in manual labor. One moment of inattention, one moment of callousness, and some injury that puts you out of commission. There's no safety net. It was a community where, it was a city where folks lived in close proximity. Disease and plagues were rampant. Diseases of contagion, diseases of deprivation from lack of good nourishment. It was a city in which there were significant stresses, there were significant racial, ethnic tensions. This was not an easy place to be. And the gospel engages the crowds of this city and sets up followers of Jesus to live within it and to continue Jesus' ministry, to care for the poor, to care for the vulnerable, to care for the damaged, to care for the casualties of this society. So we have that famous passage in chapter 25, when did we see you homeless or sick or hungry or without shelter? This is a typical description of life in this city. So this is one of the distinctive features of this reading of the gospel, to put the gospel into conversation with these particular contexts of Roman power, of struggles within the synagogue. The gospel has some very nasty things to say about synagogues and Jewish leaders, which is a very regrettable part of the gospel story. But to put the telling of the story of Jesus into conversation with, into contact with these sorts of contexts, I think gives it some real depth and some real force. But also, of course, it brings it very much into our world as well. We know something about a world of power and domination. We know something about a world where ruling powers make decisions without reference to their impact on people's lives. We know something about worlds of inequities and injustice. We know something about a world of lack of access to adequate health care and to food insecurity. This is very much our world as well. And I think by paying attention to the dimensions of this ancient world, we see a bridge to our own world and some of the ways in which the gospel engages our own particular world. So that's one of the big distinctives in this reading of Matthew's Gospel, and I commend this commentary to you. This is part 2 of some reflections on what makes this particular commentary that I've published recently on Matthew's Gospel distinctive. What are some of the features of this commentary that suggest it takes some different directions from some of the normal ways of interpreting Matthew's Gospel? Well, in this particular focus, I want to talk about a feature of this series, namely to attend to some of the moments in the history of interpretation of the gospel from the last 2 millennia. The gospel has been read by folks in all sorts of different contexts, for all sorts of different purposes, and in various publications and in various artistic work, we have a history, a sort of a tracking out of ways in which folks have engaged the gospel. And so one of the requirements for this series has been to plot out some of those interpretations in relation to some of the material in each chapter. So doing so through the gospel, I include interpretations from various media, paintings, for example, and other artwork, some ancient sermons, some modern sermons. There's even a discussion of a children's sermon from the 19th century, which is quite distressing to read, but it's part of that interpretive history. These moments also offer the ability to include different methods of interpretation. So there's some work here on disability studies. There's some work here from feminist critical approaches. There's work here from imperial critical approaches and from moral injury studies. Also, these interpretive moments offer possibilities of interpreting issues that are particularly important in the contemporary church's life. So there's discussion here, particularly in chapter 23, of some of the anti-Jewish interpretations that we have seen across these 2 millennia. Another good example comes from chapter 18, where we have the parable of the slave who is forgiven, but then does not forgive another slave. So parable, is it of forgiveness or is it of non-forgiveness? Well, in recent pastoral care literature, there's been a lot of discussion about the practice of forgiveness. Is it inevitable? When should it be offered? When might it be withheld? And so in an essay at the end of chapter 18, I engage some of that literature and some of those questions. One of the benefits of doing this sort of history of interpretation is to see that there are a range of readings and a range of approaches to the gospel, but also it helps to bridge the gap between the circumstances of origin of the gospel and our own particular interpretive moments and our own particular interpretive contexts. That these are often issues that continue to resonate with contemporary ecclesial communities and leadership. And so it's a way of being able to engage some of those contemporary discussions and see the gospel as addressing some of our own particular issues around power and injustice, inequities, but also matters of ecclesial life and discipline and practice. So that's another of the distinctive features of the gospel and its interpretation in this particular series published by Eerdmans. It's in the Illumination series, so it's available from the Eerdmans website. It's also available from Amazon. I think it's a very helpful resource for folks in ministry who are preaching or teaching regularly. I think it's a valuable resource for students, for courses, for classes. And it would provide stimulating and interesting material that reads the gospel in a slightly different way from some of the other readings of the gospel. So I commend it to you.